then Firoz Shah Tughlaq, the third guy, he has a diary, a memoir actually, which is also one of the sources for this period. So many like these, and then of course things like coins, inscriptions you might find here, and tries to see contemporary Delhi as Ibn Battuta might have seen it in the 14th century.
What's the name?
I'm not ready. Google, yes, Google Bhagwan will help us. Okay, now behind you, don't please nobody push and nobody fall. This is a Bauli, and we can go in. So if you want to walk around, there's steps over there. We can actually go down. Yeah. Would you like to do that?
Yeah. What's a Bauli?
What's a Bauli?
So the idea, this was a water tank basically. So the source is underground water. You dig deep enough when you hit water, and then you build a structure around it. Typical Baulis we know of in the Delhi and places like Agrasen ki Bauli, where they're more narrow.
There are different. It's a water storage Bauli, but Bauli.
Stone you see. I tried to point out the difference between the rough masonry and the dressing over it. If you all come here, you can see it much better on this wall.
How many are getting a cell phone signal?
So when you look at this work, you see the difference, the dress stone and the fold. That's what you see here. And yes, complex. So most of these walls are actually collapsed. Most of what you see in terms of the fortification wall from the road, all of these is nothing but a pile of rubble. So these have been carefully reconstructed, the bastions and the walls. And that's why you get a look like this. And you see patches of light red, light pink here. That's the portion which has been most recently restored. So when you go about restoring, you try and put new mortar and strengthen the walls. And the mortar you use is a combination of lime, which is white in color, and brick aggregate, which is red. So when you combine the two, you get this pinkish color. So you see a freshly worked upon monument and it looks nice pink, which is not the way you imagine ruins to look like, but apparently that's the way conservation is done. And you'll find many things around here if you manage to dig. A Bauli which proved to be Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq I's undoing. Now, when he was ruling from Delhi, there was a Sufi saint, we all know of him, Nizamuddin, who was also a contemporary. Now, and Nizamuddin and Ghiyasuddin didn't get along very well. And the reason why, one of the reasons why they say this area is abandoned is because Nizamuddin cursed it. So there's a long-standing tiff between Tughlaq I and Nizamuddin. Apparently, Tughlaq I, when he was constructing this fort, he obviously needed many people to come and work here. All the labor force he could manage. And this was the same time when Nizamuddin was at Nizamuddin and building his own Bauli. So Tughlaq I said that nothing doing, all the labor should come here. You are not going to get any. So Nizamuddin sent away everybody, but because he was such a holy man and a pious man and commanded so much following, the workers decided that we'll work in the day here and we'll go back in the night to work at his Bauli there. So when the king came to know of it, he was obviously furious that how can you do this? So he said, I will stop the supply of oil so that you can't burn lamps in the night to work with. So he did that. Nizamuddin said, okay, never mind, I'm the holy man here. I'll make the lamps burn with the water of the Bauli. So he did that. That's a magical Bauli. The water has the spiritual qualities which
It's Iran's well, basically, not India. Anybody from ONGC?
So that's one of the reasons of the sanctity of the Baoli. And later, when Ghiyasuddin, Tughlaq I, went off on one of his expeditions, and it is said that Muhammad Tughlaq, his son, who went on to become his successor, Tughlaq II, at this point of time, in the absence of Tughlaq I, Tughlaq II went off to Nizamuddin, said hi, and Nizamuddin apparently blessed him, saying that very soon you will be the king. So obviously Tughlaq I is furious that in my absence you are, blessing people randomly and telling them you're going to be king soon. So apparently sent a threatening message to Nizamuddin that I'll come back and teach you a lesson. And Nizamuddin then prophesied that Delhi is yet far. दिल्ली दूर है. So he said, अभी आप जहाँ हैं वहाँ रहिए, अभी दिल्ली काफी दूर है. And when Ghiyasuddin was coming back, before he had reached Delhi, he had come victorious from his conquest. His son decided to have a nice function for him to celebrate his victory, to welcome him just outside Delhi. So he, in a couple of days' time, he constructed a pavilion, etc., to welcome him. And that pavilion fell on Ghiyasuddin, Tughlaq I, because there were elephants all around, and the pavilion wasn't stable enough. It fell on him and he died. So he didn't reach Delhi actually. So that's why Delhi is yet far is one of the curses which Nizamuddin, gave the Tughlaqs. Also, he said that for Tughlaqabad, when all this protracted tiff was going on, one of the things he said was that since you're so arrogant, this town is either going to be abandoned or inhabited by the Gujars. Gujars, why? Because they're a pastoral community. They're not what you would call high civilization. Yeah, they're a pastoral community, and that also seems to have come out true. So all you see here is people, local villagers herding their cattle here, or it stays abandoned. So you should never fight with a Sufi saint. We're going a little further in palace. Now, the entire city wall is about 4 miles in perimeter, and there were 13 gates all around it. And the gate we have entered from was actually not one of the main gates. It was what is called a postern gate, a smaller one, and once upon a time, it might have been only for exclusive royal use. So it's not that you and I can just stroll in from there. No. There were other gates which were used by people who wanted to come in the palace area for different purposes. And they had all kinds. The names we know now are things like Dhoban, Dhobani gate, means the washerman and washerwoman's gate. The Khirki gate, Khirki is a window. The Delhi gate, and the Hathi gate, the Andheriya gate or the dark gate. So these are the names you have now. I don't think that these are contemporary or the original names. So when Tughlaq built this fort, he probably wouldn't have named them the ones which I'm telling you, simply because that these names are Hindiized version. So they are probably given by people who were living here as villagers in the early 20th century or so. And we get these names from the fact that what is called official documentation about these forts. These are done in the British times, late 19th century, early 20th century. So this is the time when there are villagers here, and they are the ones who are living in and around this area. And when you go up and document a place, especially when you don't know much about it, the first thing you do is you ask the people who live there, what do you know of this place, what is it called, what do you use it for, etc. And most of our information about not only Tughlaqabad but many other monuments in Delhi comes from these surveys, these documentation surveys. So most names at least would have come down to us in the late 19th and early 20th century. This is called a Hathi Gate. The most common, the obvious connotation is that this is where elephants would have entered the palace from. But it's not necessary. The other gates were also equally large, and elephants, if they wanted to come in or if they were brought in, could have come in from any place. Yeah. Also, I doubt if this was the only or this was the exclusive gate for elephants, simply because just outside the gate it was all water. I'll come to that a little later, why it was so. So we don't really expect a procession to be wading through water to enter the palace, yeah. So they would have used other entrances before, and not only this one. But what is typical in this gate, it gives us a better idea of how other entrances are. Most of the other gates have collapsed. So you just see a pillar here and some bit of rubble there. They're not really standing structures anymore, except the Andheriya gate. So they all have what is called a dog-legged corridor. So you enter straight and the corridor sharply turns in either direction. In this case, you can see that it's turning towards the left. And then it will be flanked by rooms, guard houses, and joined into a street which is parallel to the fortification. So the street we've been walking along was all along the fortification wall. So we've been walking in a east-west direction along the fort wall. Now we are going to an area further inside the western side. Now it's full of shrubs, so be careful. Also, it has some really large holes in the ground which go very deep. So make sure you know where you are stepping in. You don't want to be going in. It's very hard to get rescued. So follow me, and if I fall down, please save me. You're all standing on them. They're all around you. And these are actually a series of granaries. So these are huge, massive storage spaces which were built all along the fortification wall at many places here. So there's a set here, there are about 10 or 12 granaries. Now you can see only the openings, and many of them are actually quite deceptive, so it's easy to fall back, and this is what I was warning you against. And once you're in, it's very difficult to get you out.
Isn't it a good idea to actually clean them up from shrubs and
Yeah, do it.
Put a sign.
Implement the idea. Join us
So
later
are these
on.
granaries connected to each other or?
No.
Okay.
If you
They
see
never
any
walk.
connections today, it's because the wall which separated them has collapsed. So the idea was that there would have been some sort of an opening on the top of the granary from where you could put in the grain, and some sort of an outlet also towards the bottom, very much like our silos. So you also see these huge, drums, especially in old houses in villages where the grain is stored still. Drums made of aluminium and etc., where they have a small opening at the bottom and you keep piling up stuff from the top. It's the same concept. And the contemporary records, especially people like Barni and Ibn Battuta, talk a lot about granaries. Ibn Battuta is actually quite good as a source because, being a traveler, he mentioned made a note of almost everything he saw. So whether people had beard, whether they were bald, fat or thin, even details like this which people who already live there don't really care for so much. So you get a lot of detail about the city, how it was. So he says he came in at a time when Muhammad Tughlaq II, is at Jahanpana. He's no longer at Tughlaqabad. And he has some very glorious things to say about Jahanpana, that the walls were so massive, the palaces were beautiful, the bricks shone like gold, and all of this. Very vivid descriptions of what was happening in the city, and he gives a picture of a very thriving city. And he mentions that there are granaries all around. So a lot of scope is there for storage. One, because North India at that point of time had seen a series of famines also. So So it was very essential that you have some sort of a backup. In fact, Muhammad Tughlaq II, had a very severe famine during his reign, and it caused a lot of unrest for him. It caused a lot of trouble for him. So these massive storage spaces were opened, particularly during the time of famines, or to withstand a siege. You can see this architecture is all geared up that in case we are surrounded, in case somebody attacks us, we should be able to live it out for a few months. So there should be enough food, there should be enough water. The Baoli we have seen is only one structure. There are actually many more wells, reservoirs, huge, small, all shapes and sizes in this area. Many of them are completely covered up with bushes, etc. So you really can't make out where they are. But there were plenty former old Delhis. So when I am at Tughlaqabad, those areas are the older cities for me. And when this also shifts out, people are no longer living here. They are at ITO, Kotla. Yeah? So this is how, even though the capitals shift, some people do stay behind. But not in this case. Like I said, this was completely abandoned. For a very long time, nobody was there. For many centuries. It's only much later, in the late 18th century, that you find a small village-like settlement in the Citadel area. I'll point it out to you when we go there. But that was a very small, not a substantial settlement. So you don't. The fort was actually abandoned completely within a matter of 7 years or so.
So is all this land government property now?
Yes.
encroached upon by
Yes.
like
Yes.
100 people?
There's also a bit of confusion about who owns what. The archaeological survey owns the buildings, the ruins, but typically what happens, the horticulture department owns the shrubs and the ground.
That stage.
Yeah. So the ASI will conserve the wall, but it might not cut the grass. So there are some ambiguities like this, and it has led to some ridiculous lack of work. But
What's the difference between a fort and a citadel? Is the same thing?
a fort would be a larger area. A citadel is the most exclusive and the most well-defended part of the fort. So it's usually at a much higher ground from the rest of the town or the rest of the fort, and it would be even more well-guarded. It would be exclusively royal. Yeah.
Was
Exclusively royal.
Qutbuddin Aibak the first one to make Delhi as the capital, or slaves were the first one to make
No,
Delhi as the capital?
before Aibak there was Prithviraj Chauhan, the Tomars were here. So Delhi has been the capital for a fairly long time before them also.